I took a year off and then I chose to go to Guelph. The further away from home I got, the further away from my roots I got, the further disconnected from myself I was. I dropped out of university, and I lied to my parents about it for 3 months. I couldn't handle disappointing them again. My whole life I have felt like I was nothing but a disappointment to my parents. Nothing was ever good enough. I wasn't smart enough. I got to the point where I didn't see a point in continuing. I had told so many lies that I couldn't see the truth anymore. And I had created so many versions of myself that I didn't know who I was anymore. I wasn't able to orient myself in my own existence. I wasn't living my truth. I'd created so many lies and so many layers that I didn't even know which way was up. I was trying to meet the expectations of people around me, and I was failing. I felt completely lost, worthless. I felt like I was incapable of building my own future. Unless I adhered to the expectations of my family and society, that I would continue to fail. I remember sitting in my living room and thinking, is this the only option? Is this going to be my life? Continuous missteps and compounded failures? I had woven my web so deep that I couldn't see a way out. I thought it would be easier for everyone if I ended my life. I thought about taking my life for several weeks and then decided that that was the best option. All of my housemates went home for Christmas break. I told my parents that I had to work, which was a lie. That morning I woke up in an empty house. I took the dogs for a really long walk in the conservation area. I had my breakfast. I came home. I filled the tub full of water so that the dogs would have something to drink. I sat down in my chair. I wrote a letter to my mom. I wrote a letter to my dad. I wrote a letter to my grandfather. I wrote a letter to my housemates. I wrote a general letter to my family, and I wrote a letter to my best friend Sarah. I bought a brand new bag of dog food, and I sliced it open so that the dogs would have enough food to eat for the week that everyone would be away. I folded all of the letters, and I stuffed them in the envelopes and wrote the name of each person on the outside. I set them down on the floor beside the chair. I remember feeling hollow and cold. I'd made the decision to cut my wrists because it would be fast. And if I were to do that, there was no way that I would make it to the phone to call someone if I changed my mind. I sat in the chair for what seemed like an eternity, and my dog sat at my feet, staring me straight in the eye. I told her to go. That dog sat at my feet for 4 hours. And then something changed. I had an overwhelming feeling that I was making a mistake. I fell apart. I immediately called my dad and asked him to come and pick me up. My dad came and picked me up, and he took me home. Not to Toronto, but home. Home to my roots, home to my family, home to everything that was familiar to me growing up. I needed to go back to the beginning. At the same time that I moved home, my dad had started his journey to sobriety. And I went with him to 90 meetings in 90 days. And I did that in support of him because he was trying to quit drinking for the first time in my entire life. So every day we would go to the AA meeting, then we would go to church, and then we would go back to the Cozy Grill for coffee or breakfast. Over the course of those 90 days, I realized that my dad didn't go to the diner because they had the best coffee or because he loved the steak and eggs. He went there because that was his community. Community is something I felt like was missing from my life while I was growing up. Although I went to those AA meetings for my dad, I think I got as much out of them as he did. Those 90 days allowed me to discover who I was as a person. Remember my way back home. Remember my way back to myself, back to the things that I love, back to the people that I love, back to my purpose, back to my why. I realized that I was put on this earth for a reason, and it's not up to me to decide to cut that short. It also made me realize that in those moments that I was feeling so desperately alone, I wasn't. My friends and my family were only one phone call away, but I didn't want to burden them. I didn't want to burden anyone. The weight of having to tell all of those truths and all of those stories and revisit all of those hard memories seemed like too much for me to bear, and definitely too much for me to put on someone else. Committing suicide seemed like the only way out. But I'm so glad that I didn't. One of the most important lessons I've learned over my life is that it doesn't matter where you've been, it only matters where you're going. And at any given moment, you can choose to rewrite your ending. Yesterday is over. You don't have control over it. But today you can rewrite your ending. I've always had a deep knowing that I'm meant to do something else. Something that makes a difference. Something that feels like meaningful work. Once I started reconstructing my narrative, I realized how much agency I truly have in my own story. And that 1-degree shift in perspective changed everything. I've had more diner experiences over the course of my life than I can count. But the one thing is consistent, and that is the sense of community. Being with my dad when he died changed everything fundamentally about me in an instant. It changed the way I saw my career. It changed the value I placed on time. Last year I launched my brand, Hey Darlin'. It's a diner concept that's built on the fundamentals of legacy, community, nostalgia, and comfort food. It's the kind of place where you can pull up for a cup of coffee and feel like you're at your neighbor's house. I developed the diner brand Hey Darlin' in honor of my late father. And in his memory, we donate 2% of our sales to the Boys and Girls Clubs of Canada. My hope with the brand Hey Darlin' is to offer a place where people feel comfortable, warm, and welcome, and where everyone can experience a sense of community so that they don't have to feel alone.